Hello, everyone. I have an amazing founder here today. David, thanks for being here.
Hey, very nice to be here.
Indeed. So I know there's a lot to unpack and want to start with the most recent. I think you just did a round. Would love to hear a little bit more about the journey of how you guys started the round. I understand that maybe there was a shift in the vision and how sort of the VC community responded to the before and after.
Oh, yeah. So in fact, we had an event called the Bitcoin Renaissance back at the end of February at East Denver. And that event was to showcase that there is now a new wave of projects building on Bitcoin. Right. So Bitcoin, of course, is the oldest blockchain, is the biggest crypto asset. Everyone knows that. But what is not very clear to the general public is that the developers community has kind of shifted away from Bitcoin for many years.
Right.
And that's why these new chains like Ethereum, Solana, and so forth are formed. And so it's been like almost like a developer desert for many, many years. But suddenly, in the past 1 year, the attention has shifted back to Bitcoin, or nodes, for example. So that got people interested back in Bitcoin. And now there's a growing developer community. And this event we organized is to showcase put all these projects together. And so during that meeting, I got into conversation with several investors who was kind of interested in exploring this new space of Bitcoin Renaissance. And that's where the conversation started.
Yeah. At that time, it was a new idea, bringing more programmability to Bitcoin and, enabling staking and more DeFi, unique assets on Bitcoin blockchain. And that's how the fundraiser sort of got started? Or is that where you got the idea to, pursue Babylon kind of full time?
Oh, no. We did a fundraise last year. So after that fundraise, I already started working Babylon full time. But we got more momentum through this Bitcoin Renaissance event.
Right.
And so that was where the conversation with the investors started on a new round of fundraising.
And what was the vision at the time, around the time of the Bitcoin Renaissance event that Babylon was pursuing?
Yeah, our vision has always been the same from day one. So we started this project in early 2022. And at that time, Bitcoin was like a desert in terms of development.
Right.
But we were always interested. In fact, I got into the crypto space about 6 years ago, studying Bitcoin security properties. So that's my starting point. So Nakamoto's white paper was kind of my entry into the crypto space. And I've always been really fascinated by sort of this very strong level of security of Bitcoin because of this long history and also because of the proof of work. Consensus model, and even more importantly, because of the simplicity of the protocol.
Right.
So because of all these factors, I'm always passionate about it, but the attention has shifted to proof of stake. And so one day we came with this idea about 2 years ago and said, hey, Bitcoin is proof of work. It is very secure, but the security is only for benefiting itself. And if you look at the whole crypto ecosystem, it is a very isolated chain. There's not much interaction between Bitcoin and the rest of the crypto ecosystem, which by now is mostly proof of stake. And so our idea was, is there a way to take the security of Bitcoin and use that as kind of a connection tissue with the proof of stake economy? So that was always our vision.
Right.
And in pursuing this vision, we come up with multiple protocols. Until last year, we came up with this protocol called Bitcoin staking. And so in the previous round fundraise and this round fundraise, both are used to propel this Bitcoin staking vision forward.
I see. Okay. And how did you decide on sort of structuring the round, and how did that shift from prior round to this one? From finding the lead to assessing the valuation to the terms?
The first conversation with Paradigm, which is our lead, actually is at the Bitcoin Renaissance event.
Oh, great.
So, and we had a meeting. So it was Arjun. Arjun is our main contact, and Frankie. So they came to Bitcoin Renaissance and we had a meeting, and they said, you know what, this Bitcoin new wave is very exciting, but there are many, many projects.
Right.
And actually we have not invested in any one of them. Okay. 0. And in fact, they told me they may have only invested in a very small number of projects in the Bitcoin space in general. Okay. So, Paradigm has always been a lot focused on other proof of stake ecosystems, in particular Ethereum, etc. So they said, we really want to sort of have one sort of flagship investment in this Bitcoin Renaissance movement. And so we started talking. And so to them, it was very important that the project that they invested in is not a short-term project, but more of a longer-term research-based infrastructure type project. And I guess we fit the bill. We're very research-driven. Bitcoin staking is actually quite a technological feat to achieve, precisely because Bitcoin doesn't have a smart contract. So because of the lack of programmability, in Ethereum, for example, if you have smart contract, it's very easy for you to program staking functionalities. But for Bitcoin, it's very, very difficult.
Right. And doing that in a secure way.
Yeah, of course.
Sure.
We don't compromise on the security. In fact, the level of security we have is, the security model is almost identical to Ethereum staking. So, so we start talking and we had many conversations. And so our focus was collaboration with Paradigm. So that was our first phase of the fundraising. And after we sort of sign up with them, then we bring together a few other investors. Two investors I would like to highlight there is Polychain. So Polychain was one of the leads on the previous round with the co-lead, Hack VC and Polychain in the previous round. And actually both Polychain and Hack VC is investing in this round as well. But Polychain is particularly interested because they actually are now helping us to incubate projects in the Babylon ecosystem. Right. So they're very interested in participating in this round as well. Another investor I want to highlight is Bullish Capital. So Bullish Capital is a relatively new investor. They have a relatively new exchange, but they're very excited about the project because they're very aligned with Bitcoin. They have a lot of Bitcoin, and they're very interested in finding new use cases for the Bitcoin. And so that's where our conversation with them started. Yeah. Also in Bitcoin Renaissance, but over the past few months, yeah.
Yeah, I hear you. And I know in the context of doing the round, you did an interesting mechanic where while investors were participating, they were also committing and pledging some amount of Bitcoin that they will later stake, which was a way to sort of solve the jumpstart problem, right?
That's the previous round. This round, there was no Bitcoin commitment.
Okay, got it. I see. And right now, what's sort of the highest priority for you? Is it getting more Bitcoin, more apps, enhancing security, slashing?
Yeah, so our effort right now pursue in two different directions. First, we just launched the last testnet before the mainnet launch, just yesterday.
Excellent.
Actually, 2 days ago, on Wednesday. So we will be launching the mainnet in hopefully a month to a month and a half. So then in the mainnet, it will be a locking Bitcoin only mainnet. So no proof of stake chains. So focus on the security for the stakers. So that first phase is really for us to test, to give the stakers the confidence that this is a very secure protocol that we're building. And we're using it also to gauge the level of interest of the community in our protocol. For us to get a good level of interest from a very broad range of the crypto ecosystem, supporting our protocol through staking the Bitcoin. Support, you can say in words, I support you. But, putting Bitcoin in a new protocol is a different level of support, I would say. Because it's their Bitcoin, it's digital gold.
Exactly.
So that's the challenge. And I think we're up for this challenge. But, and so that's one direction. The other direction, so direction is more the supply. If you think about Babylon, you should think about it like a two-sided marketplace.
Yeah.
So this is a supply side, but a marketplace cannot exist with just supply and no demand. And so we're also working very hard in bringing projects on board that would use this Bitcoin staking for bootstrapping the security. And so we are talking to many projects. In particular, very interestingly, there are many new projects, as I mentioned, that is building on the Bitcoin ecosystem. And for these projects, it's very natural customers for us to get Bitcoin staking as part of the security budget. So we're talking to a lot of them, in addition to other more traditional proof of stake ecosystems like Cosmos and Polygon. So we're having ongoing conversation with them and integration effort as well.
Yeah. So let's dive into each front a little bit.
Okay.
The security maximization. What's the current outline that enables BTC owners to confidently stake without their Bitcoin getting locked, stolen, inaccessible, and actually get the yield that they're promised?
So, one thing interesting about Bitcoin is that although it doesn't have a smart contract, it does have a scripting language, because you need a language to describe transactions, so-called UTXO transactions in Bitcoin. Alice pays Bob 1 Bitcoin, that type of thing. So the interesting thing about the scripting language is it has only very few opcodes. In some sense, it's a disadvantage from a programmability point of view, but from a security point of view, it's actually an advantage, because the simpler something is, actually, the more secure it is, because there are less attack vectors. Fortunately for us, although it's simple, it does have this one very important opcode, which is a time lock. So that allows the users to lock the Bitcoin for a certain duration of time. And this locking is needed because to provide security, you have to lock the Bitcoin. You cannot just freely use the Bitcoin and claim to provide security to the proof of stake chain. Yeah, so basically our protocol is essentially using this very simple scripting language to design a so-called staking contract. And so for a user, the user would have some Bitcoin in a wallet, like a Ledger wallet, and then they'll plug into a wallet, and that wallet that we integrate with, we're now integrating with many different wallets, actually. We have already on our testnet, we have 5 or 6 wallets, I think. And then they will basically self-sign the user staking transaction.
Which is effectively utilizing the time lock opcode.
That's right. That staking contract agrees to lock the Bitcoin for a certain duration of time. And very importantly, the lock is in an address that's completely controlled by the staker. So they are not sending the Bitcoin to the Babylon Foundation, or they're not sending the Bitcoin to David Tse. Please do not send Bitcoins to me, by the way, because that will make me very nervous. And so everybody controls their own Bitcoin. Okay. The only thing is that they can't use this Bitcoin until this time lock is over. Now, we also provide an additional functionality, that is, if they want to take their money out before the time lock is over, they can also do that. In the jargon of staking, this is called unbonding.
Yeah.
Okay, unbonding. And they can do that, but then there will be an unbonding time of around 1 week. And this is also quite common in proof of stake systems.
Sure.
So we have all these functionalities, but all these are essentially done using the time lock functionality. Now, in the full staking contract, there's also a very important functionality called slashing. Okay, slashing is the connection between the Bitcoin that's locked here and the proof of stake chain is securing. But since in our phase 1 we don't have a proof of stake chain yet, slashing functionality is disabled in mainnet. So in mainnet there's no slashing.
Makes sense. It will get kicked on when there's actually apps running.
Correct.
That need the bonded service providers of
That's
security.
Right. Correct.
Okay, great. In terms of security, the second layer, before we move on to the second direction, is ensuring that the app developers have the necessary sort of security guarantees that they're in fact getting. If there is no slashing in version 1, what's the incentive for them to come and start building now?
Yeah, so in phase 1, since we are just testing the locking mechanism, there's no slashing.
Right.
But once we launch a phase 2 with actual chains or actual roll-ups using our technology, then there will be slashing.
Right. And
so that, otherwise, it's not real security.
Sure, of course. So looking at the other direction of finding these app developers to come and build on Avalon, what are some of the interesting use cases that you anticipate that there's demand for? If you were to say, I would encourage my friends to go build these and that kind of app, what would you recommend them to focus on?
Yeah, so I would say that kind of 2 reasons why one would be interested in Bitcoin staking. Okay.
Or apps that are powered with Bitcoin staking.
There's 2 reasons why an app would be interested in using Bitcoin staking to bootstrap the security. Okay. One is an economic reason, and that reason is universal for any app. It doesn't depend on a specific app.
Right.
And the economic is that because Bitcoin is such a big pool of asset, right? It's like Uber. If you're in a city with lots and lots of cars, then you would expect it's cheaper to get a car.
Right.
If it's very few cars, then, the supply is more, then it's expensive. So Bitcoin is a much bigger asset than any other asset. And so that would reduce the cost of security. So from an economic point of view, I believe this is attractive for decentralized apps and chains.
Right.
So that's the general reason. Now, more specifically though, are projects that are particularly interested in getting in alignment to the Bitcoin ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. For those projects, using Bitcoin staking is a very natural way of getting this alignment. And we find that that is indeed the case. And there are many projects that are building on Bitcoin. And so that's sort of where we see the demand, the reasons for demand coming from.
What do you see in terms of, Bitcoin DeFi and Bitcoin NFTs, ordinals, and what does sort of the future look like on the very lively Bitcoin layer 2 in terms of the apps? What is the vision you have for that future?
Good. The history is always a good predictor for the future.
Yeah.
So a good history would be Ethereum. How does the Ethereum become a thriving ecosystem? Is not just Ethereum main chain. All these layer 2 that's built on top of Ethereum, layer 2, layer 3. So these are also called scaling solutions because Ethereum has limited capacity and gas fees are very high. In the case of Bitcoin, it's a similar thing and also something different, which is the similar thing is that the block space is also very small. Okay, so you cannot put a lot of transactions in there. In fact, when the ordinals came out, they drive up the cost of the gas, the transaction fees of Bitcoin to a very, very high level, almost unseen before.
It's sort of, since you're drawing the analogy, it's like the CryptoKitties example.
Yeah, so ordinals is the Bitcoin version of CryptoKitty for Ethereum, correct? Block space is one thing. 2 is in terms of the contracts that you can write. Bitcoin doesn't have the smart contract. So it's not only the gas fee is high or low, it's just you can't really express it in an efficient manner. So if you want to do any smart contract, it would be so huge. That's just impractical. If doable at all. So to solve these 2 problems, I think there are 2 directions, right? One is to provide some off-chain, off the Bitcoin chain, data availability. So I think that would be useful for increasing the block space. We are quite interested in that problem, but there are also other projects that are working on that as well.
Right.
So that's one direction. Another direction is now because execution is very expensive or impossible on the Bitcoin chain. The idea is to be able to shift that execution to layer 2. So that's what we call Bitcoin layer 2. But to do that, a very important part is for Bitcoin to be able to verify that execution. So although Bitcoin is not doing the verification, but Bitcoin is able to verify someone else's execution on layer 2. And that is a very tough problem. And there's a lot of teams are working on this particular problem. You may have heard of a technology called BitVM. So BitVM is a technology that is going towards this direction. But right now, BitVM is still very complex and very slow and very costly, still very costly. And so a lot of effort has now been focused on trying to make it practical. This will take a while.
Right.
I think different from a few years ago, there are now clear technological directions where we're going. As opposed to saying, hey, this problem is impossible. Let's just develop on Ethereum.
I hear you. I was asking more in terms of the kinds of apps you anticipate seeing in Bitcoin ecosystem, but you go in an interesting direction. I want to probe that a little bit more. Do you anticipate there would be like a proof market evolving where a off-chain computation ends up having to prove computation? There's like verifiable compute, some zero knowledge verification that then commits a transaction on Bitcoin. How do you see
so going back to your question of, is there any special apps that were built on Bitcoin ecosystem that we do not see in Ethereum, right? So I would say I separate that question into 2 parts, right? One is that I think what attracts people built on Bitcoin to a first order is the size of the asset. It's just the asset is so huge that if you get a small percentage of that, then you have so much liquidity that's useful for any app. I think any app requires some liquidity. So I think that is in some sense the first order reason at this moment. Now, in terms of any special apps, that's a very interesting story. So, for example, I was discussing with someone, an interesting problem is MEV on Bitcoin. Okay? So, MEV on Ethereum is actually one very interesting driving force of a lot of technological innovations in the past few years, projects like flashbots
Sure.
and so forth. But Bitcoin also have MEV, because actually Bitcoin's MEV problem could be even more serious than Ethereum, because Bitcoin miners have full control over the block proposal.
Right.
So
reorder all the transactions
yeah.
you want.
Yeah,
from anybody.
so an interesting direction is kind of to build applications which tries to, monetize this MEV. Quite interesting problem. And this is very specific to Bitcoin. Well, at least very specific to proof of work.
Right.
And it's quite different from proof of stake, like Ethereum.
Mm-hmm. So when you say building on Bitcoin will bring liquidity, I make one connection but not the other. So let me clarify. You give the security guarantees on time-locked Bitcoin.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily translate to participating with Bitcoin, the asset, in DeFi, because
that's right. So I can't fool you that easily, but let me go a little bit deeper. So think about it. On Ethereum, let's again go back to example Ethereum. Some people say Ethereum is like the test net for Bitcoin. Okay.
We've seen certain things work. Let's go back to the mainnet.
So let's follow that logic.
Yeah.
Now, Ethereum staking is a security model.
Right.
But what happens is that the security model of staking becomes a DeFi staking market. You have liquid staking
an asset
protocol
that generates yield.
Exactly.
Right.
So you have liquid staking protocol, you have eigenlayer restaking, you have liquid restaking protocols. So you have a whole industry which essentially focuses on liquidity. So it's saying that, hey, if you have security, I can also create some liquidity out of the security. And that's exactly what's happening now on the Babylon ecosystem. We have at least 4 or 5 projects building liquid staking protocol. So you can imagine a situation follow. So the Bitcoin staking provides the base level security. Now, once you have security, then users are more likely to be able to inject liquidity into that protocol. And the liquidity could be generated through this liquid staking. So you'll take this locked Bitcoin, mint some asset, and that minted asset can be deployed in certain chains that receive this Bitcoin staking. So that's what we see in the space.
I see. And then the next point I need to really understand better is the aspect of the generation of the yield, right? So we're golden on staking so that we have baseline security, we can do restaking apps, but then all of those need to have the incentive to be done. So some application is going to run on Bitcoin and it's going to generate some fees for the security, right? Yes. How and where does that get generated?
But this question is not specific to Bitcoin staking, I think. Because this question of generating yield for providing security is already well established, I think, in the proof of stake world.
The testnets.
The testnets. And so we are kind of applying the same logic here to say that, hey, if you get security, then you should provide yield. That yield could come, in general, that yield should come from the economy that the security provides.
Sure.
So you have an army to defend a country. If the country has a very bad economy, then there's no way you can support a strong army. So you need a good economy, and that good economy will generate some yield, and that yield will goes to a part of that will goes to the support the army.
Right, and so then there will be like a bi-directional flow, right? Where if there isn't economy, then more of the soldiers of the army will go and find something else to do, and so that's why you find it sort of essential that these apps get built to support the yield.
Yeah. So our vision, right, is to essentially use Bitcoin staking to relieve the app developers or the chain founders of this burden of trying to, provide security. Okay. But relieving the burden means what? It means that they can focus on building better apps.
Yeah.
And therefore more successful apps will generate more yield. to benefit the stakers.
That's
so
great.
hopefully we have a flying wheel effect.
Hey, I know you have something else to get to. Is there anything you'd like to cover? And
No.
any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I'm great. It's great to be here, Sam.
Before I say goodbye, so David, is there anything that you'd like to park with our listeners for, developer resources or anything else that they should know about?
Yeah. One, all the information is on our website, babylonchain.io.
Mm-hmm.
You look at that. There's also a Twitter handle, babylon_chain. However, very importantly, we launched our last testnet before the mainnet. So if you're interested in participating in our mainnet, please go and try it out on our testnet.
Mm-hmm.
You can go through our website to go to the testnet staking dashboard to provide staking. We launched 2 days ago. We had a staking cap and it was filled in 13 minutes.
Wow.
So there was quite a lot of interest in
Great.
trying it out. So please come to our next cap. So in 1 week, we'll raise the cap again.
Sounds great. David, thank you so much for all the insights and sharing your vision for the
All right.
Bitcoin DeFi future.
Yeah, thank you, Sam.